Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, Joe released his new top 30 Mets prospects list. We break it all down. We also talk a big free agent option and Josh Naylor coming off the board, the latest on Edwin Diaz, and of course, answer your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SMY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Performance, range, style. 3 different ways to make every drive an occasion. Whatever your reason, there's never been a better time to say, let's take the Cadillac. The all-electric Cadillac family of vehicles, Escalade IQ, Vistic Optic, and Lyric. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo, who has been hard at work on a new top 30 that everybody is waiting for. By now it should be out as you're listening to this. I'm going to hammer some questions about it today on the show. But before we get to any of that, Joe, how are you? Have these been late nights, or is this something that's kind of a slow burn you can update throughout the couple months that by the time it's ready to publish an update, it doesn't feel like a lot of work?
It's a lot of work, Connor.
There's no way other way to slice it.
I'm naturally a procrastinator to a degree. And I should have been just doing this over the last month and a half, but instead I was like, you know what? I'll do it in like 2 weeks. That'll be perfect. And as everything you do with NFL draft and college football, there's a lot of calls, there's a lot of conversations with people, and I try to make sure the conversations are both with Mets people and non-Mets people, and then I blend my thoughts into it. So it's kind of a 2-week deal of trying to jumble all these different thoughts, put it into one, and put together a list that I feel good about. And I feel really good about it. And I hope everybody goes and reads it, SNY.TV. It's a lot of words, so have a little patience. But I think you'll come away feeling like you learned something about all 30 of these prospects. And I would love it if every single person that listens to this podcast goes and reads it. And either A, if you're a YouTube person, leave in the comments what you think about the top 30 list. And if you're just a podcast guy, leave a 5-star and let us know what you think about the top 30, because I think it's going to be a big piece of something we could go back to, because the Mets are probably going to be trading people from this list some point this winter.
I was going to say 2 things. One, that's a good prompt, that if you have any thoughts on it, leave us that 5-star review like Joe said, or leave a comment in the YouTube comments, and we'll bring it up next show to ask even more questions on it. That's a chance for the audience to get involved. Number 2, Joe, very savvy of you and the lovely team at SMY to get this thing out before the before the winter meetings, because I have a feeling plenty of guys on this top 30 will not be on it after a couple moves are made. We think the Mets are going to make at least one significant trade this offseason. But speaking of the offseason, let's jump right into it. This isn't really fun news, but this is the nature of free agency. Josh Naylor agrees to a 5-year deal per Jeff Passan to go back to the Mariners. The Mariners made him a priority. They see him as part of their core, part of their nucleus that took that team as close as you can get to the World Series this year. It was a great year for Josh Naylor, 28-year-old free agent first baseman. As we record this, we don't have the exact numbers on what the money is per year. I'm sure a lot of estimates have it somewhere in the $100 million range, which isn't wild, and it's kind of the nature of the first base market. So, Joe, I think a lot of Mets fans had 2 reactions to this. At least I know I did. One, disappointment. I really like Josh Naylor, and I thought he was a really good fit for the Mets. Number 2, a little bit of the now what, because we don't know where things stand with Pete Alonso and the Mets, but this was a very, very thin market that just lost one of its biggest names that was a part of it.
I'm just glad, Connor, that the hot stove is starting to percolate just a little bit.
Something.
We usually get a couple things before Thanksgiving, and then we get into the winter meetings, and that's when things will really pick up. But what it shows really is that timing is everything in Major League Baseball free agency. And Josh Naylor got offered a 5-year deal, and he pounced, because I'm not sure if that was something that if he sat out on the market for a period of time and maybe waited for Alonso or waited for other things to transpire, would that deal still even be available to him? As far as like the direct impact to the Mets, of course, you lose one of the potential fallbacks if Pete Alonso were to depart and go somewhere else. But on the other side of the coin, I know there's different takes on this, but for me, I don't think this really impacts Alonso's market much at all. Naylor is 28 years old. Alonso's about to be 31 years old, so there's an age gap. Naylor is a significantly better defensive player, so it's an easier projection forward over the next few years. I still, Connor, in my heart of hearts, I think Alonso's going to do better than he did last year, but I don't think that he's now getting a 5-year deal or more just because Josh Naylor got a 5-year deal.
Yeah, Joe, I totally agree with you. I think that if anything, I don't think this helped Pete Alonso because once again, what Pete Alonso needed was somebody on the first base market to just have this breakthrough kind of deal. And you can't even put Vladdy in this context, obviously, at all, which was a very unique circumstance. The age is the big factor here. And Naylor seemed, and once again, we don't have the exact money, but it seems like a situation where he took the term over the AAV. If he went out to the market, he probably could have got a 3-year deal with a higher AAV than that's going to come in with this one. But he clearly liked his time with the Mariners organization. The Mariners are an organization with Jerry Dipoto that they make more trades than anybody in Major League Baseball. So this might have had an expiration on it. They might have had to say to Josh Naylor, hey, this deal, we can't leave it on the table forever because we got to have a solution for you. And we might have to make that solution and we have to pull this deal once we do. So he said if he felt he was happy there and he liked the term of the deal, then so be it. We know with Pete Alonso right now, because he's been as transparent as possible about this. And you look who he hired as his agent and his, the season was over for 10 minutes and he's saying to the media that he's opting out of his deal. Like, I don't necessarily have a problem with that because we all know it's coming, but the tone of it was like, okay, we know where the eyes are set on right now. Pete Alonso is going where the most money goes, and that's fine. He's earned the right to do that. So, but that doesn't mean that there's going to be a team out there willing to give Pete a 6 or a 7-year deal, like you said, Joe, for a 31-year-old first baseman. And now the Mets kind of have to figure out that, okay, Pete Alonso, there's a good chance he's their best option, right? This is the dance they did last year where he was their best option and his market was not kind to him, that they got what they wanted, a deal that wasn't very long, and Pete got what he wanted with the opt-out. So I'm not set that history is going to repeat itself here and think it just ends exactly how last offseason ended. But this is the first domino where if you're a Mets fan that really wants Pete Alonso back, well, your argument is, what are their options, Joe? It's what if there's something that exists, we don't see it right now because it has to be on the trade market, and those are harder for people like us to project.
Definitely hard to project trades like Munetaka Murakami. I've heard some
where there's so much risk.
Yeah, there's a ton of risk. Like you're signing Murakami with the hopes that he is Pete Alonso. Like that's essentially what you're doing. You want him to be Pete Alonso. So just keep the Pete Alonso that you already know. And I think we're getting to the point, and we talked about it a little bit on last week's show, that there is no question that Pete Alonso is the best option for the Mets, especially if what Scott Boras said at the GM meetings is valid, that he is willing to spend some time at DH now. And Alonso has already openly said, I believe it was with Mike Puma or someone with the Post, that he knows at some point he's going to have to become a designated hitter. If he's willing to split that up now, I'm a little more willing to stretch on the years that I was maybe originally willing to do, with the thought that Alonso is going to be hard-headed and say, I'm a first baseman. I don't care what the metrics say. I'm a great first baseman. But if he's willing to split his time, I'm thinking of being a little more flexible, because the reality here is if Alonso does walk, which I acknowledge the very real possibility that occurs, the Mets plan B has to be better. And that's something we said on last week's show. And it's very hard to see that path unless they're going to go a defensive first baseman and then Kyle Schwarber at DH, and you tie up DH for a long time with an only DH. So it's almost feels like the antithesis of what David Stearns might actually want to do. It's a very it's a very convoluted discussion, and I'm hopeful that, like you said, it won't have the same outcome as last year where his market craters and he essentially crawls back to the Mets for whatever. But I'm hopeful that there can be a meeting of the minds here. Let's do 4 years, throw in a 5th-year vesting option or something like that. There's a point where David Stearns has to step out just a little bit of his comfort zone and make sure that the Mets are in position for 2026 to not be 2025.
Right. And with that comes a little bit of a, like you hinted at, Joe, a give in from Pete that one of the pathways for the Mets to be better this year is to shore themselves up defensively. And part of that is that Pete Alonso doesn't play 160 games at first base if he's back. So it just takes a little, everybody giving a little bit here. But we're going to have a lot of conversations about Pete because he's going to have a market. We hear a lot of noise about the Red Sox, and we're going to talk more about the Red Sox during our questions because we got some really good 5-star reviews and YouTube questions regarding this. But yeah, Josh Naylor, the first big domino off of that first base marketing free agency. And a little bit more news on one of the Mets' other current free agents. That's Edwin Diaz, who said it's 50-50 on his return to the Mets, which is probably the biggest change in tone, I think, so far, Joe. With Diaz, it always felt like, and I'm not saying he doesn't want to be back because he clearly does, but you would think by now Diaz has had some kind of conversation and maybe he's gotten an indication that it is going to be a little more difficult. To be fair to the Mets, maybe the Mets were on the side of this, unlike last time, where last time they said, here, Edwin Diaz, this is the biggest reliever contract. We want you here. Easy to get done. Sign it. This time, maybe it's going to be more of a go see what you can get. And we're going to be here at the end of the day. I hope this is the Mets thinking. We're going to be here at the end of the day to match any offer you get, which is a little bit more hardball than we're used to the Mets seeing play with Edwin Diaz. But 50-50, Joe, this one with me, like I've been pretty pessimistic on the return of Pete Alonso, although Josh Naylor coming off the board does change things a little because I don't know what the solution is going to be, but I'm still pessimistic on the return of Pete Alonso. I can't sell losing Edwin Diaz. I don't know what the plan would be. I'm not convinced there is a better plan than Edwin Diaz closing games. I don't even think there's a plan that comes close to matching him closing games. And this one is simply about the money. With Pete Alonso, there's arguments about the term. There's arguments about his inability to defend. There's arguments about how his bat will age. Whether you agree or not, those arguments exist. With Edwin Diaz here, Joe, this is one that the Mets better be really, really careful here because I think there's a lot of contenders that will value him very highly.
I love the 50-50 thing because, one, it's free agency, duh. But also, you're like an odds guy. If you say there's 30 options for a guy and one team has a 50-50 shot, that's pretty good odds, I would say, that Edwin Diaz is going to be back with the Mets.
Yeah, a pick 'em for the Mets is not the worst odds, yes.
That's how I'm trying to interpret this. But really, I think what it comes down to, and Diaz expanded beyond this and talk about how he has to do what's best for his family, which, translation, who gives me the most money is who I'm probably going to sign with. And every single free agent has the right to do it. And this is Edwin's last bite at the apple for a long-term deal. Doesn't mean if he signs a 4 or 5 year deal, his major league career is over after it. But at that point, he's in his mid-late 30s. He's going to be signing a 1-year deal or maybe a 2-year deal. So he has every right to go ahead and try it. But I am with you 1,000%. I really want Pete Alonso back, but the Mets absolutely have to have Edwin Diaz back. And if that means you're going longer than you're comfortable, that is what you're going to have to do. And David Stearns, you mentioned kind of like the maybe more hard line in negotiating. Like Billy Epler was probably just like, okay, Edwin Diaz, this is great. Here's 5-year deal. Let's move forward. But Stearns is very knowledgeable of what the market looks like. And yeah, go ahead. And if you get a 5-year deal from somebody, come back and maybe the Mets will match it. Or maybe he'll go out there and see he has a qualifying offer. He wants to be record money as a reliever. How many teams are really going to jump at that? And I still think Diaz would like to be back. I think the Mets would like to have Diaz back, and I don't think that is just GM speak. I think they really do want him back. And from my seat, for whatever that's worth, they dang sure better get it done.
Right. I think it's interesting, Joe, with Stearns. And I think there's not a lot of nuanced conversations around Stearns anymore. There's just part of the fan base that is furious from last year and thinks he won't spend on any players. And then there's, the other part of the fan base that, and full transparency, I think we align with this, that believe in his long-term outlook. But we do call it like we see it. I think there's times where you're doing what's pragmatic and you're doing what's smart for the goal of long-term sustainable success. Long-term sustainable success in baseball is achieved by drafting and international free agency vacuumed up into player development. I mean, I know that's the most simple way you could say that, but you do this as much as anybody in the industry in terms of coverage of draft, free international free agency and player development. Like, that's really the pillars of what it comes down to. But there are certain organizations, and this is going to make for a very interesting CBA situation a year from now that I can't wait. And by can't wait, I mean it's going to be exhausting to talk about and cover. Yeah. So it's nice we don't have to right now. There are cheaper routes, like there's better routes, easier routes, right? And for David Stearns works for one of the organization where money doesn't really matter. So you can patch your holes with money. And one of the holes, as Edwin Diaz is not on the Mets today, he's not. The Mets don't have a closer today. Patching one of those holes would be that exact situation where just use the money, right? Like that's what it's there for. So I do think there's a fine line of times where, like, not going out and giving 8 years to Corbin Burns or Max Fried. Yeah, there's a real healthy argument not to do that, in our opinion. And we've already seen some of the dividends pay out from that. And we've also seen the other side of it. But retaining your closer that at his best is the best in baseball, you just kind of want to nudge David Stearns and be like, use the cheat code. Like, you have the cheat code that a lot of other executives wish they had. Am I crazy?
Hit up, down, triangle, circle, bingo. Square, and bang. We're back where we belong.
There.
Yeah. What the Mets need to do, and I'm not saying they've done a poor job of this, because obviously they haven't. They have Francisco Lindor, they have Juan Soto, like they have star players. But that money cheat code that you're kind of talking about, it should be to keep the best players when you have the ability to, or add the best players to the roster that you can. And there is nobody, in my opinion, better than Edwin Diaz. The difference here is you just want to be careful what you're spending on. Overspending on the middle of the market. You don't want to be caught too much in doing that, but sign the best, trade for the best, get the best, and then you supplement it, as you said, with the farm system, with the player development and drafting and everything that goes into that. That is how you're going to build a team that is not just a playoff contender year after year, which would be a step up for Mets fans, at least for us, but a potential World Series contender.
Speaking of the system, let's go down on the farm. It's a special one. Of course, Joe has, as we've been teasing, has his new top 30 Mets prospects list. And reminder, as soon as you're done listening, or while you're listening, you can pull it up right now on SMY.TV and follow along. Joe, I ask you this, I feel like, every time you make one of these, but was there anything unique while making this one, something that stood out to you, or just your overall big picture thoughts on the group this time?
Big picture, it's an excellent group of prospects. Like, I'm writing about guys in the 20s that I'm like, wow, this
harder decisions.
Some harder decisions, but also too just some of the profiles of guys that are in the late 20s. I'm like, man, if this was a few years ago, this guy might be like prospect 13, prospect 14 in the type of system that the Mets had at the time. And it's a huge credit for me for the way the Mets player development system has come together over the last, call it 2-3 years. Some may take this glass half empty. I'm a glass half full guy. There was only, let's call it 2.5 first round picks on this list. Carson Bench, Jet Williams, and Mitch Voigt was like, he's a sandwich round pick. So like he was the Mets first pick, but not like a technical first round pick. And part of that is guys like Kevin Parada and Colin Houck haven't lived up to the first round pedigree that they were. But the other side of that is holy heck, this team is drafting guys in the third round, the fourth round, the fifth round, even later than that, and turning them into legitimate prospects that A, can be contributors to the Mets, or B, big pieces in trade. Headline at the real top of the list, Nolan McLean, third round pick. Jonah Tong, seventh round pick. Brandon Sproat, second round pick. And those are big time prospects in the sport. So it's a refreshing list to make, and there's some really exciting pieces, especially on the pitching side as you get deeper and deeper into the system.
All right, who's the biggest riser in this rendition? It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that wasn't even on your last top 30, but somebody that's made a pretty significant climb.
Yeah, so from my last 30, which was just after the trade deadline in early August, there wasn't like a significant, like there wasn't someone that sat at 22 and they're now 13 or something like that. But I want to take this just over the last full season. Heading into the 2025 year, AJ Ewing was on the just missed top 30 for me. So he just missed, and I probably should have put him in, but kind of last second, he was probably like 31 or 32. Now he's number 6, and
that's pretty wild.
He was dangerously close to cracking the top 5 and even pushing someone like Brandon Sproat outside of the top 5. You look at Ewing's profile, it is bat to ball. It is elite swing decisions. The power is not a huge part of his game. He'll run into some things on the pull side, but largely it's going to be putting the ball in play, getting on base, and incredible athleticism. He had 70 stolen bases this year, reaching the AA level. He started to hit the ball a little bit harder as the year went along, but you want to see maybe a little bit more of that and then continuing to increase on like his line drive percentage. Because I'm not looking for Ewing to be an absolute slugger, but you want to see just a little more impact to the baseball. That's nitpicking. To me, this is an up-the-middle, true center field prospect that is a future everyday big leaguer. And I spoke to one person, not with the Mets organization, that saw him multiple times this year and said, at the same age, he's like a light Pete Crow Armstrong. And
that would Crow, be glorious.
If you look at his early years, he wasn't really projected to be the power hitter that he ultimately became. And I don't think Ewing's going to become a 30 home run guy, but like Pete Crow Armstrong turned into, but everyday center field type of player, a really exciting prospect that came from the 4th round compensatory pick that the Mets got for Jacob deGrom leaving for Texas. And now he's a borderline top 5 prospect in the Mets system. And I could tell you, dating back to the trade deadline, and I'm sure it'll be the same case this winter, the Mets phones were lit up by opposing teams trying to get their hands on AJ Ewing.
Yeah, I think the Mets should learn from their past, and this wasn't David Stearns' decision, obviously, but I would have a hard time trading away any center field talent at this point. It's just a rarity in the game. It's something that's been a rarity for the Mets. And even if you have a starting center fielder that is plus defensively, plus speed, but a mediocre to average bat, it's still so valuable in the game. Look at what the Mets dealt with at the end of last year. So that should really excite fans, because Ewing is somebody that, like you said, Joe, he's had a big time rise. We constantly talk about on this podcast how vital athleticism is going to be for this organization as some of the key players start to get older. And now you think of Jet Williams and you think of Ewing, and even like Benj obviously isn't the same speed threat as those guys, but he's a younger player that brings more athleticism. So yeah, that's a really exciting one. How about this is always the tough ones, but we try to be informative. How about a drop off from the list? Somebody that you said, okay, this player is going the right direction. And then maybe since July, or even going back to maybe a year ago, it just hasn't gone that way.
At the beginning of the season, and I did the spring breakout game broadcast with Steve Gelbs and Jim Duquette, and this guy hit a home run in the spring breakout game, and that's Boston Baro. He's a guy that we thought was going to break out in a really meaningful way. He added some weight, he added some strength, and what it came down to is it just didn't translate on field this year. He hit only 224, 282 on base, and OPS barely above 600. He did steal 28 bases, as he is a pretty good athlete. But the reality here is Baro doesn't impact the baseball enough. And it's a lot of ground balls. And unfortunately, you have to, at some point in time, you could add on the weight, but it's more than just being more physically mature. You have to work on your swing mechanics and get it to where you're barreling the ball up more effectively. And it was a tough year for him. I try to give him somewhat the benefit of doubt because of his age. But this is a guy that, for me, is a bigger faller because I just had such high expectations for him coming into the year. And he unfortunately wasn't able to meet them. And he'll get an opportunity, obviously, to come back in spring training and reestablish his value. It's not like he's done for as a prospect just because he had a down year. But you're going to need to see some meaningful changes from Baro, I think, for him to kind of jump his way back up the list.
Last thing, was there anything, I'd call it a fun fact, but maybe even wonky while writing this up where, because, with Nolan McLean, the big thing we always talked about was the Mets are going to let him play both ways while developing, and eventually he settled into pitching. That looks like a pretty good decision. We've talked about different stories with guys in the past, but was there anyone interesting, could be on the back end as well, that you go, oh, this is a little bit of a different background?
Kind of unique, I think. You're going to see a lot in the latter part of the 20s into the end of the list. Some pitchers from the 2025 class that the Mets are very excited about. Guy at the real end, Nathan Hall, is someone that kind of stood out to me, as he had internal brace surgery, so he missed most of the last college season, and then heading into the beginning of 2026, he's going to be a little bit behind. But it's a fastball up to 98 miles an hour, a really good slider. So he's one I would keep an eye on. But if you want to go to kind of the early 20s, that Binghamton rotation is generating a lot of attention. Guys like Jonathan Santucci, guys like Jack Wenninger, guys like Will Watson. But there's like another layer to that Binghamton rotation. Zach Thornton is one that I want to talk about as well. ERA below 2 this year, 1.98, but he only pitched 72 innings or so. He had an oblique injury, and that kind of wiped out the rest of his season. This is a old school pitchability lefty. He throws nothing but strikes. He only had 11 walks on the season. It's a fastball in the low 90s, touch 94, curveball, slider, changeup. Like your typical, like if you were just to go on MLB The Show and say, make me a road to the show pitcher, the generic kind of person, like build, will be a Zach Thornton type of pitcher. And he looks like a back end type of starter that you can rely on to take the ball and throw strikes. And then another one I want to highlight, RJ Gordon. He was a 13th round pick. So again, back to the story of these late round guys becoming something. He was a college reliever turned pro starter. He missed his last year of college with, again, internal brace elbow surgery. And his velocity ticked up in his first go at pro ball, up to 95 miles an hour. And talking to a couple Mets people, they have a plan for him this offseason and said, don't be shocked if that number's ticking up during 2026. He had a 3.36 ERA, pitched across a couple levels, obviously ending at AA Binghamton. 147 strikeouts in 128 innings. He had a kick change this year. That was like the first thing the Mets had him do. And it already looks like a weapon within just a few months, and shows kind of where this modern day pitching is, that you can just try this grip, throw it in a few bullpens, and it could turn into something. You're going to need him to throw some more strikes, I think, to really amount as a starter. But if he ends up a multi-inning type of reliever, that is incredible value for the 13th round in an MLB draft world, that the odds of making it after the 10th round are so minimal. I think RJ Gordon looks the part of a future big leaguer.
Of course, you could check out Joe's all-new top 30 Mets prospect list on SMY.TV. And of course, you could find it on his Twitter page at PSL2Flushing. You're listening to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SMY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. Let's close out today's episode with the mailbag. We saved plenty of good stuff for this. Jay, we're going to package two together here. Jay Bloom 4, thank you for the 5-star review. Ken Rosenthal is reporting that the Arizona Diamondbacks are open to trading Ketel Marte. They're looking for players to fill several holes. What type of package do you think the Mets can offer to do that? I would do one of Mauricio or Vientos plus Jet Williams and Sproat. Is that too much, too little? Marte would be an awesome addition at second base. If you bring back Pete, your top 5 is Lindor, Soto, Marte, Alonso, Nimmo. Let me know your thoughts. And then Bateman is King on YouTube said, would you prefer to sign Bregman or trade for Ketel Marte? Ketel Marte, not somebody we have talked about yet, Joe, with the Mets. A little bit on the older side when you factor in trading here. Marte, I know he's 32 right now. He just turned 32, so he'll have his age 32 next season. He's been on a 6-year deal. He's actually under contract until at least 2030, but he has a player option in 2031. So for a 32-year-old, listen, Marte is good enough that they probably can move him. I mean, this is somebody that had an 893 OPS last year and a 932 before that. But there's a little bit of that. I don't want to call it the Cano feeling with this because it just feels disrespectful. But man, like, I don't know if you're going to want to pay in that contract from 2029 to 2031. Am I being really picky here, Joe? You could tell me if I'm being ridiculous.
Yeah. Connor, I would say there is probably some appetite that the Mets can still take on some length in contracts. Marte is the best second baseman in baseball. So
he's amazing.
If you are trying to win right now, going and getting Ketel Marte is going to significantly increase your chances of doing so. I wouldn't go as far, and I know you weren't either, to compare it to Robinson.
It's not apples to apples at all. Yeah.
he was clearly on the downside of his career. But how many guys do you want tied in through 2030 into 2031? As far as a package, like, that doesn't feel incredibly far off in my eyes. Like, maybe there's a couple substitutions you make, but a guy like Jet Williams would fit wonderfully in Arizona. Brandon Sproat hops right in their rotation, and then they get another infielder like Vientos and Mauricio. Because I think ultimately this contract, if Arizona does decide to move Marte, which of course their GM nicely said to GM meetings, highly unlikely. We love Ketel Marte. He's not going anywhere. But if they were to move him, it's by no means a salary dump, but it's kind of getting out of a contract that they wouldn't maybe hate to get out of, because there was some like weird stuff too in 2025. Like, I think there was like a robbery at his house and he was away for a while. Like, just some kind of like weird things have transpired with Marte over the last couple of years. But for me, I hate to ride the fence because I try not to do that. But he's a guy that, boy, I'd be ecstatic to get a Ketel Marte jersey and wear it to Citi Field this year and watch him be fantastic for the Mets. But I really don't know if I want him here for that long of a period.
Right. So here's my take on it. I think, say the Mets did this trade for him tomorrow. We would record the podcast and we would be like, God, we can't wait to watch Ketel Marte with the Mets this year. I mean, you're talking about somebody that, once again, can play in the middle of the infield and give you, we'll call it 28 to 32 home runs next year. Hit not far off from 300, get on base at a 37% clip, like all these things that are just the dream. The problem is, the reality is, as well, that's not what it's all about. Why, like you said, Joe, it's not a salary dump. So I think the combo would be like, you'd love Marte if it was just, hey, we're just taking on the contract because we're the Mets and we don't care about money and we're going to be paying a ton of 36-year-olds one day and we'll just pay the money then and replenish the team then. Who cares? But yeah, if you're trading two notable pieces in Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat, I would be very surprised if Jet Williams has the career that Ketel Marte has, but you're still weighing the youth movement to that. So that's a complex one, especially the fact is, it seems like he's probably one of the biggest names out there this offseason that we know of so far, if they're really willing to listen to him. And if you're the Diamondbacks, you probably should be willing to listen to him, because maybe you're selling high while you can, right? You're literally selling high while you can. Marte probably has 2 elite years left, but then you're also getting out of 3 years where you wouldn't want to be paying that contract, and you got a lot of young talent for him in exchange. So I actually think this is one of the most interesting questions we've gotten on the mailbag for a really long time, because I'm with you, Joe. I'm actually struggling to answer it. If the goal is to win a World Series this year by any means necessary, then yes, Ketel Marte fits the bill. But if the goal is to also be somewhat responsible, lean into a youth movement, which Jet Williams is a big part of, which brings me to the second part of this, and this kind of changes the dynamic. Would you prefer to sign Alex Bregman? Because Alex Bregman does not cost you Jet Williams. He does not cost you Brandon Sproat. He's not as good as Ketel Marte. But I also don't think Bregman's even going to get a contract, Joe, that would surpass Marte's current contract.
So I think it depends how you look at it, right? Like, I think Alex Bregman's going to get significantly more money per year than Ketel Marte is getting. I think Marte isn't his contract like just under $20 million a year
the
or something
AAV
in that neighborhood?
Is weak, but I'm talking about the term, no. But for sure.
And the term probably, like, how different will it be? Like, is Bregman's looking at what, maybe a 4-year deal? 5 at the most, something like that, and without the qualifying offer?
Probably almost the same. It could be a little less.
Yeah, but more per year. And Marte's a way better player, and I have to shift Brett Beatty to second base, at least temporarily. Like,
that's fair.
Give me Marte over Bregman, and I'll deal with the fact that I have to replace.
Look at you giving away the top prospects, and me not.
It has to happen at some point, and
you're right.
I don't mind switching roles with you every once in a while. But Jet is a guy that, look, I'm a huge fan of. Everyone knows how big of a fan I am of Jet Williams, and I think he's a future everyday, really good second baseman that would make an impact on the Mets. But as you said, Ketel Marte makes a major impact on the Mets right now. And if Pete Alonso does go, Ketel Marte is closer, I think, to the type of bat that you could talk yourself into being the quote-unquote Pete replacement, rather than Bregman, who I think is still a good hitter, but you're not feeling awesome if Alex Bregman's hitting behind Juan Soto as his protection. It's just Bregman's a good hitter. Marte is a special hitter.
Right. No, that's a really fair way to put it. And this is the kind of stuff that, like, it's once again, until it gets reported, Ketel Marte could be out there. That's kind of harder to project, because this is the kind of move, not necessarily this one, but a trade of this capacity is something that is going to have to be on the table for Stearns, the creativity. Mikey Ray YT says, looking at the pitching market, I'm curious what you think about Tatsuya Imai. He has tremendous upside and wouldn't cost a qualifying offer like most of the top pitchers, but there's definitely some uncertainty there. Do you think he's worth the risk? Joe, have we talked about Imai yet?
Kind of. Like
briefly mentioned in our pitching preview, I think.
Yeah. We haven't done much on him. Exciting young pitcher. 27 years old. Fastball will get up to 99. He could stand to elevate it a little bit more, but he has like the kind of arm slot that you're looking for to do so. He throws a slider, which very uniquely is like a backup slider, but almost all the time a backup slider. You know how, like, sometimes you'll be watching, it's just like, that slider backed up on Diaz. Like, Imai is almost, I think it's intentional because it happens so much, intentionally throwing backup sliders, which have really confused NPB hitters. I don't know how that will translate to America, because I don't know of any pitcher that is throwing backup sliders all the time. He mixes in a splitter, like, often is for Japanese pitchers. Talking to a couple people about him, projection kind of like a mid-rotation starter. So I don't think you're signing Imai with the idea of him being your ace. Like, I think he projects more like a number 3, but has really good stuff, and maybe the right pitching system can pull just a little bit more out of him. The key here, Connor, is he's not attached to the QO, which is key.
Right.
I just said key twice, but he's not attached to the qualifying offer. I wouldn't be surprised if Tatsuya Imai got more money than Framber Valdez got, or more money than Dylan Cease got.
He's
The
way
market,
younger.
I think, yeah, he's younger. There is risk, but at this point, the risk of coming from Japan to America is not the same as it used to be.
No.
Like they have all the advanced data over there, and there's people incredibly smarter than you or I that know what percentage change there is because it's a different baseball in the NPB. It's a smaller ball with more raised seams, so it's a little bit different than the major league ball. But they have algorithms to tell you kind of like what's the percentage drop off you could expect. But Imai is a guy that I know the Mets are interested in, and Andy Martino has reported as such. Now it's just a matter of what his market ultimately looks like, and it could be, well over $100 million, maybe even creeping a little bit closer to 2.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by him because once again, it's a younger arm. The upside is always tantalizing with a guy like this, and of course we're factoring in the downside, but it also fits the mold that we know Stearns likes to upgrade the team as much as possible with surrendering the least amount of assets possible. And the qualifying offer not being attached is it's a big feather in the cap here for sure. So I like that shout out from Mikey Gray, and I think the Mets would absolutely be interested here. It just kind of fits, kind of what they're looking for in a sense. Evan Schwartz, 2293, said, "We got Nate Lavender back. I'm so hyped. Does he have a shot of making the opening day bullpen?" Evan, you and Joe are in the same bucket here. Joe texted me right away when Nate Lavender was back. It was kind of one of the more hilarious departures and returns, Joe. He didn't really do anything while he's gone, and now he should be ready to go.
Yeah, Lavender, I remember we were in Port St. Lucie for our show to kick off the year, and Lavender pitched and had an excellent outing that day, and all the reporters huddle around his locker, and I heard the best description of a fastball I think I've ever heard from a player, and they're like, "Why do you think you get so much swing and miss on your fastball despite you're really throwing like 93, 94? And he's just like, "I throw it with might." And I'm like, hell yeah, you do. But Lavender being back, he had Tommy John surgery. The Rays picked him up in the Rule 5 draft, and the Rule 5 rules, I guess, carry over to the following year if a pitcher is injured. And he also had, I believe, bone spurs or bone chips cleaned up at the end of August, which isn't like a crazy uncommon follow-up to Tommy John. And the Rays, they're always a team that their 40-man roster is always so deep that they're making trades today and tomorrow. Like they have too many guys that they need to protect from the Rule 5, so somebody has to go somewhere else. And Lavender just wasn't going to make the cut, so they put him on waivers. He cleared waivers, and by rule, he goes back to the Mets. As far as making the opening day roster, I don't think so. But hey, he could come into camp as a non-roster guy because he's not on the Mets 40, and he could compete for a spot. And at worst, he's in Syracuse and awaiting a call when you go through 50 pitchers.
39. Yeah, exactly. 50 pitchers, 100%.
Yeah. You're going through all those arms. So there'll be a Nate Lavender day in 2026. I feel confident in that.
Yeah, save this clip, Jeff, for June 28th when the Mets have a doubleheader and Nate Lavender's got to eat seventh and eighth inning of game 2.
He's the 27th man, and he comes in to pitch behind Tatsuya Imai.
Yes, that would be nice. Our last question from Matty Rhodes. Thank you for the 5-star review, Matty. At the end of the season, David Stearns was asked about whether he would be hiring a GM, and it did not seem to be a priority for him at this time. What is the difference between the role of a GM versus president of baseball ops? Seems like they are one and the same, but I'm sure there are significant differences. What are the benefits of having both positions, and how would their responsibilities be divided up? And are the Mets missing out on anything by not having a GM at this time? So David Stearns is the GM of the Mets, and he just has a much more powerful title, which with powerful titles comes more money. So, I mean, obviously, Joe, you are very equipped to answer this, but like the reality is it's just another opportunity for the Mets to get another smart person in the room because a GM title and salary is very appealing to a lot of top talents out there, where if the Mets were just employing a GM, it'd be harder to bring in a high-end talent because then they're like, oh, cool, I'm the assistant GM. Well, a lot of the point being, there could be an assistant GM out there that is insanely talented. And if the Mets go, hey, you want to be the GM of the team? We're going to pay you more money and you get a bump in title. That's how you get the top end people. So this is a good placeholder, in my opinion, for when they want to bring in someone like that. But I guess the flip side is, Joe, not every top talent is going to want to work under David Stearns, because then as much as you're the GM, you're not the guy.
It's a game of titles, Connor. That's really what it is. As you said, David
every
Stearns
sport, this is how front offices are.
He's the GM. He's the president of baseball operations. There is no physical difference between the two titles. Where the difference can come into play, kind of to Maddie's point here, like the divvying up of responsibilities. A lot of the thought was, when David Stearns came on, there was a thought that Billy Epler was going to remain as general manager, and everything happened there. The reality is, you go ahead and you do a lot of the day-to-day stuff. So it leaves the president of baseball operations to be able to focus on the big picture strategy, and the GM deals with the day in and day out of things. And leaving that role open, I think, is intentional by David Stearns. Not that he's unwilling to give out the responsibilities that the GM would require under him. He wants to make sure he's getting the right person when that job maybe inevitably gets filled. And it could also be as a mechanism to keep somebody like Eduardo Brizuela in the organization, who's an assistant GM. A lot of people think highly of him in the sport, and maybe someone's looking to hire him as a GM under a president of baseball operations at some point in time. And Stearns can just say, nope, you're staying here, and you're going to be the general manager under me. You're not going to go be the general manager under insert president of baseball operations here.
Right. There's a lot of nuance to this. My experience covering this in the NFL for a long time is and this isn't the way everywhere, but the smart organizations, you might be able to go get someone that you're going to pay a lot of money. They're going to have this really nice title, and it's not in their bio on the website or publicly known, but that guy might be, for the baseball's sake, like, we think this guy really specializes in pro free agency. We're gonna pay him to be our GM. His strengths are, he's almost gonna run our free agency, where everything's gonna go through David Stearns, but David Stearns is managing player development and the draft and international free agency and working with that person on pro free agency. But that person might be able to go find you that reliever for 1 year, $9 million, that, because it's a manpower aspect. So that's, guys have strengths and weaknesses. I'm fascinated by, over the years, Joe, to watch, and we've already seen the change since Steve Cohen has been here, the Mets international scouting. And I'm not talking about in Latin America, which is very, very important, but overseas in Japan, as we just had the conversation about Imai. Like, the Mets, for 2 decades, we never even imagined them going after, players on that side of the earth. And now every time a guy is a free agent, if he's even open to the idea of playing somewhere that's not the Dodgers, the Mets are usually circling. So there's a whole nother problem with that side of international free agency, but you get the point.
The Mets are getting on the short list, right? Of
teams
that are going to be considered.
Giants, and Dodgers, Yankees, Mets,
Mariners. Red Sox sneak a couple in every once in a while. They had Matsuzaka and Yoshida more recently. But Connor, great point too on like free agency and things like that. Like nowadays too, trade talks often initiate at the lower levels. Like the assistant GMs are the ones that start talking, and then it trees up. It's like, okay, David, Tarek Skubal, Detroit's willing to listen. They have interest in this, and then he'll get with Scott Harris in Detroit, and then they'll work on the crux from there. But it's definitely like a tiered thing, and I think there's an advantage to eventually having a GM. But I think Stearns wants to make sure that that role is plugged with somebody that is going to make a significant difference. And it's not just, hey, we have a GM, so I have to do a little less. You certainly don't want that to be the goal of David Stearns.
It's a great call out. It is funny, and some fans would be surprised by this, that trade talks can start with, I don't want to say low-level employees, but lower-level employees than the GMs, like you just said, Joe. One year, and I'll close with a story. When I was at the NFL Combine, I was at a restaurant in a secluded room, and two people at the table that I know were directors in front offices. They were not the general managers of their team. And they started to kick around a player. One guy wanted the player, and the other team was like not really tied to keeping the player throughout the offseason. And the talks went on. I'm sitting there, and sure enough, like a couple, because it's at the combine, the league year, when the league year starts, a couple weeks later, you see on Twitter the trade go through, and those were just directors. They both said how they had to run it up to their GMs to approve the compensation and give the final sign off. So like you said, these things really do start at all layers of organizations and run up to GMs, because yes, the guy that you are always going to default to for every organizational decision the Mets make from personnel is David Stearns. But there are so many different people at all levels of organizations that are involved in personnel decisions and ranking those things up to the top. So this is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Performance, range, style, 3 different ways to make every drive an occasion. Whatever your reason, there's never been a better time to say, let's take the Cadillac, the all-electric Cadillac family of vehicles, Escalade, IQ, Vistic, Optic, and Lyric. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. Joe, I'll ask you this every week until it happens. Do you think next week's episode we will be discussing any transactions for the Mets? Instead, this week we discussed one that was a player we both liked but went back to the Mariners.
Yeah, don't think so, Connor.
Nate Lavender-esque kind of return.
We did miss on the coaching staff. I thought this week we'd be breaking down the coaching staff, but we're getting there. That's the way I'm going to look at it. Once you get to Thanksgiving, that's kind of you're starting to get over the hump of the early winter, and everyone kind of knows what they're planning to do. So I don't think so for next week, but hey, there's always a couple things in November, and we got one with Josh Naylor. There's no saying that it can't be the Mets.
Remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. And, of course, you can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel. Become a subscriber over there as well. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll catch you next week.